What if all you have is this? What if this is what you have in your fridge for your sourdough starter and it's so little and you're thinking, how do I turn this into a huge batch? Look at this starter. I got to open this up. I fed this last night. I've been doing multiple feedings. Check this out. Look at all of that sourdough starter. We have 4 quarts of sourdough starter now. Okay, why would you want to have that much sourdough starter? Well, what if you want to make a huge batch of dough? Okay, check this out. Wait, this thing is so heavy. It's all full. That's all sourdough dough for our everyday bread, because this weekend we're hosting in-person sourdough workshops, and we are going to be baking this bread and shaping it and talking about scoring and like all of that goodness. And so today, though, what we're going to dive into is, how do you take this small little amount of starter and turn it into a big batch? A big batch like this, so that number one, you could give it away. You could make tons of bread. You could prep several different things on the same day, which is really the biggest reason why I love doing the big batches of the sourdough starter, because I want to make multiple things on the same day. So I see what you're saying, that you're like, that wouldn't even fit in my fridge. Believe me, this is not what we normally do. We're going to have, I think, close to 40 people here this weekend. And so we're making a whole lot more bread than we normally would. But the biggest reason why I do a big batch of starter, not necessarily this big, is because I want to make a batch of pizza dough. I want to make a batch of everyday dough. I want to have some extra starter to go back into my main jar. I want to have some extra of the discard so that I can make a batch of cookies. So there's lots of reasons. It doesn't have to be that you are trying to make a huge batch of dough that wouldn't fit in your fridge, and then you think, oh my goodness, who's even going to eat all of that bread? But the reason why we want to make these bigger batches of starter is because I don't want to have a huge jar of starter in my fridge all of the time. I don't want to have a bunch of excess in there. I don't want to have multiple jars. I just want one small amount that I can grow from each week that I want to bake. So let me see. I'm going to move myself closer. I think I got a little far away from you all when I was bringing out my big bread. Okay, let's see. Linda has a question. She has been trying to start 4 different starters. She's on different days, and you haven't had any of them rise. Okay, Linda, we're gonna, so our admin Shelly will pop into the comments whenever she has a chance to get online, and she'll send you the link to the video, but we will also put the link down into the description below for if you're watching this after the live is completed. There's Shelly, she's here. She's gonna Linda, she'll send you the video for how to make a sourdough starter. There's lots of reasons why your starters might not be rising. One of the biggest ones is really that they need to be in a space that it's like 65 to 75 degrees. So if you feel like your house is really cool, which right now it's winter time, it's normal that our houses would be colder, and sourdough starter knows what temperature it is outside. Seriously, when it is hot outside, even though my starter and my dough might be in the refrigerator, they grow faster during warmer seasons. So find a good spot in your house that's warm. Some things you can try is to turn the light on. Like if you have a microwave like this over your stove, turn the light on the bottom of the microwave and put your starter in the microwave. So the light is on in the bottom, and it makes the microwave into this really nice proofing box. If you have, like, you could wrap it in a towel and put it by a heat vent. So think about the temperature of your house. And honestly, that is one of the biggest things. Like when people tell me that their starter isn't rising, the first question I always have is, well, what's the temperature in your house? Because if it's cold, It isn't that your starter won't work, it's that it'll just be much, much slower. The other thing is that different flours are easier for the sourdough wild yeast to gobble up. And so I suggest trying to start your starter initially with like a bread flour because that has a really high amount of protein. It's easy for the sourdough yeast to gobble up and get food from. And then if you are wanting it to be a rye starter, or you're wanting it to be whole wheat, or you're wanting to adjust what that starter is, you can then feed it different flour once it starts to get active. Okay, let's see, another question. Julie says that her bathroom is the warmest room, but I don't think that's a good idea. I don't think I would put my starter in the bathroom. That does feel a little strange. Find a heat vent. Sometimes people will say that they will put a towel in the dryer and then they take it out of the dryer, wrap it around their starter. You can do the same kind of proofing thing with your oven. This is dangerous though, because if somebody turns your oven on accident, then it's gonna cook your starter, which is a little bit of a bummer. So think about how warm it is, and then think about what flour you're feeding it. Also, the ratios that you feed your starter do matter. So let's talk about that really briefly, okay? Why are there different ratios? Why do people do like 1-1-1 or 1-4-4, 1-5-5? And I know when you first get started, you're like, what in the world are they talking about? All those numbers are saying is that we're going to use one part of our starter. So let's practice with it, okay? Here's our starter, and if this is what I have, this is all I have in my fridge currently in my Nigel jar, and I need to have a bigger batch, not because I'm going to feed 40 people, but because I want to make everyday dough, I want to make pizza dough, and I also want to have enough starter to make a babka. Let's say that's what my goal is. Here's the thing, here's how I start, is I turn my scale on, I put my bowl on it because I really like feeding the bigger batches of starter in a large container, so that we're not getting, like, I'm basically going to use this bowl to mix up the bread anyways, so I'm not getting something else dirty, which I know a lot of people are really concerned, as you should be, with too much sourdough starter going down your drain. When you use the bowl or a container that you're going to mix your dough up in, then it's less washing for you too, less sourdough starter going down the drain. So the only thing that we have to remember is what we're putting in the bowl. So I'm going to tear out my scale. I'm making sure that it's on grams. So if you're doing this with me, make sure your scale is on grams and tear it out, which basically means it's not reading any weight from our bowl. If I take my bowl off of the scale, it tells me, oh, your bowl weighs 313 grams. Okay, I put it back on, it's zeroed out. So I'm not going to go wash this jar. I'm actually just want to scrape out what's in here, because I'm going to return starter to it once I have it all fed. I'm going to put a big amount back in here so that I have it when I want to bake again next week. So the amount that I have in my jar that I just pulled out is, let's see if I can scrape out a little bit more so that it's an even 50 grams. Boom. Okay, so my starter jar looks so sad and empty. Don't worry, starter jar, we're going to feed you again. We're going to put some back in there once we have this all fed. But this very first feeding, my goal is simply to get this starter to wake up because it's cold from the fridge. And I want to just get it so that this is its first feeding. So I'm going to do a 1-1-1 ratio, which means I'm doing the same amount of each element. So 50 grams of starter, and then I'm going to put in my 50 grams of my water. There we go. And I always like to mix my water and starter up together. Even if I'm making bread, I always mix the liquid and the starter together because it allows you to get it dispersed. And then when you put your flour in, you don't have this big clump of starter in there. And these, if you don't have a Danish dough whisk already, I encourage you to put it on your wish list. Okay, now I'm tearing the scale out again because now we have the Danish dough whisk, we have our water, we have our starter. I don't want to see any of that weight. I just want to put in 50 grams of flour. So I tared my scale and then boom, here we are, we're at 50. So we're going to mix this up and then this is going to rest for 4 hours and then I'm going to come and I'm going to do a big feeding. Now, the reason why people do the bigger ratios is number one, when I come back, I'm going to do a 1-4-4, which means I have 1 part starter, which is 150 grams because that's what we just put in our bowl. That's the like, if you add all the elements together, starter, water, flour, it's 150 grams. So when I come back in 4 hours, I am going to feed this starter and we're going to do a 1-4-4. So we have 150 grams of starter, that's our 1. And then we're going to times 150 times 4, which is 600, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yes, 600. So when I come back, I'm going to do 600 grams of water, 600 grams of flour, cover. And here's the cool thing about doing those larger feedings is you're giving your sourdough starter way more to eat, which means it is going to take much, much longer for it to hit its highest rise, which means you don't have to worry about it for 10, 12 plus hours. And the reason why I like to do those 1-4-4, 1-5-5 even is number one, you get a really big amount of starter so you can make lots of different things all on the same day, pop that dough in your fridge, and then all week or even for the next 10 days, depending on how long your fridge can hold your dough, you're able to bake and make all sorts of stuff without having to go through this whole process. So I like to do this feeding at night, usually around 7, 8 p.m. Usually it's like whenever we've finished dinner, we're getting the kitchen cleaned up, kind of finishing the last stuff before we just kind of relax for the evening. I'll do this big feeding and then it sits on the counter. Let me rinse my hands off real quick. It sits on the counter and then the next morning, my starter is fully activated like this. And then I'm ready to make my dough. But I didn't have to baby it all night long and check it and make sure that it's, I don't have to do anything with it. I just feed it and let it sit on the counter. Now, this is why though, I like to do the big bowl or big container when I'm doing a large batch of starter. Even if I know there's no way it's gonna fill this whole thing up, I still will use a really big bowl because I don't want it to go overflowing onto the counter because cleaning up dough or cleaning up the starter off your counter is no fun and it turns into cement and then my starter's on the counter and I can't actually bake with it. Not cool. So I like to use the big bowl because then I don't have to worry. I can like go to bed at night and not worry that the starter is gonna like overflow. Okay, let's see. What questions? Okay, this is a great one. Judy's asking, how accurate do you have to be when you're using your scale to feed your starter? You don't have to be crazy accurate. You could do 48 grams of starter, 52 grams of water, 53 grams of flour, and it's still going to be fine. The thing that gets wonky and it makes the starter not react properly is when people aren't using the scale and they're just trying to guess. Did I do about the same amount of water and flour? If you're using way more water, your starter's just not going to rise at the same rate because the water is there to hydrate the flour, but the wild yeast needs the flour to eat. So it's important that you use your scale so that you can get about measurements, but don't stress like, oh my word, it's 1 gram and you're trying to take 1 gram out. It's fine. The sourdough starter isn't that needy. It just needs you to be close to the same measurements. Oh yes, Julie's saying, when the sourdough starter dries, it's like cement. It is. It's terrible. If it dries on my counter, I basically put some really hot water on it and a rag and let it sit there for a little bit so that it will soften it again. So that's why I just use the big bowls. I don't want it to like boil over, basically. Bubble over, not boil. The other reason why I don't always feed the starter in jars is this is not where I am making my bread or my English muffins or whatever it is that I'm gonna make, I don't make it in a jar. And so I use the bowls because that's where I'm gonna make my bread or whatever it is. I do think when you're first starting, it's really good to use a glass container simply because then you can see what the starter's doing. And think of it like you've met a brand new friend. Your starter is a brand new friend, and you're trying to get to know it, and you're trying to understand what it does and how it activates and how it grows. And so, using a glass jar when you're first getting going is great because then you can really see what's happening. I do suggest that you use the wide mouth jars like this because these you can get. Now the Danish dough whisk, that doesn't go in there, but the Danish dough whisk won't really go in any jar, but you can get easily any other kind of like element in there to scrape it. So don't use a small mouth jar. You'll be frustrated. It's hard to get everything out of there. Okay, let's see. What other questions do we have here? Okay. Julie's saying that she actually throws her sourdough starter in the trash instead of it going down the sink. That is totally fine. You want to be so careful that you aren't junking up your drain lines. If you compost or if you have chickens, the sourdough starter is so good for your compost and for the chickens. So what I will do sometimes if there was like, I don't know, something went off or I didn't have time to use it or there's just way too much, I just use a paper towel because a paper towel is also compostable, and I wipe the stuff down. I throw it in our compost bin, and all of that live yeast in the sourdough starter is so good for everything that's happening in the compost. It's like giving it food. And we don't personally have chickens, but our friends who have chickens say that the chickens go wild. They will just peck and peck and peck and eat all of the sourdough starter. So there's a couple more ways that you can use it. Okay. So another question, is it not a fantastic idea to make a big starter if I'm not making a lot of bread? I completely agree. If you don't need that much starter, don't make that much starter because then you just have it left over. You have tons of jars in your fridge. But this is where, as you get to know your sourdough starter and you start to understand the ratios of feeding it, you can feed exactly what you need. Or a lot of times what I'll do on a weekly basis is I feed so that I will have 10 to 20 grams too much fed starter, so that I essentially have 10 to 20 grams of discard. And the reason why I do that is because guess what? It goes right back into my main starter jar that lives in the fridge. So anything that I took out of here, I'm replenishing it. It got a dose of food. It's revived again. If there's still starter in my jar, which a lot of times there's a little bit left in here, I mix it all up together and it revives what is in the fridge, and it essentially replenishes it so that you can bake week after week after week and never worry about running out. So before you feed your starter, the best thing that you can do is to actually look at your recipe and see how much fed starter do I need to have. So that's the first thing I look at. On our weekly basis, if I'm making a double batch of our everyday dough, that means I need 300 grams of starter. So that's the first thing I look at. The second thing that I think about is, when do I have time to mix this dough up? Am I going to mix it up on Monday night? Am I going to mix it up Monday morning? Like what is going to work best for my schedule? And then what I do is I take out a portion of my starter from the fridge. If I have enough to do a, let's see, if I have at least 50 grams, then what I do is I feed it. I do a 1-4-4 feeding. So like, let's say that I'm going to be able to mix it up on Monday morning. That's when I'm going to make my dough. On Sunday night, I would put 50 grams of starter into my bowl, and I would actually feed it 200 grams of water, 200 grams of flour. And then on Monday morning, I take 150 grams out of this bowl, put it back into my jar, and then I'm ready to go and I can mix up my dough. If I was like, oh, I don't want to have 150 grams of discard, then I would only feed, I would cut it down. But I essentially am like doing the math so that I really have exactly what I need for my recipe and just a little bit left over. The ratios of how I feed the starter really have to do with how long it's going to rest before I use it. So if I'm feeding it at night and I'm not going to use it till the next morning, I don't do a 1-1-1 feeding because it will hit its highest rise at like midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning. And guess what? I'm not making dough. I'm not going to mix up my bread dough at 1 a.m. So don't do a 1-1-1 feeding if you're about to go to bed. Do a larger 1-4-4 feeding. Okay, let's see. Other questions? Okay, this is a great one. What's the ideal amount to have in here? So I actually like having somewhere between 150 to 200 grams. The reason why is because sometimes I'll be like, oh, I have time to feed my starter in the morning and mix up my dough at lunchtime. Well, in order for that to happen, I need to have at least 100 grams of starter that I can take out so that I can do a 1-1-1 feeding and have 300 grams of fed starter at lunchtime to mix it up. It also allows you to have a little bit of discard on hand if you think, ooh, I want to make the molasses ginger crinkles with the sourdough discard, which Shelly put the link into the chat, and we'll put the link in the description below. They are the most amazing cookies, so delicious. Or the sourdough discard snickerdoodles, so good. But if you don't have extra starter or discard in your fridge, then you can't make that stuff just whenever you want. You're having to feed it. So I like most of the time, I would say this jar is around here. The reason why it's so empty today is because I did that massive feeding last night in that big bin. And I'm going to refill it. It's going to go back up to here so that I have 50 to 100 or even 150 grams that I can take out without worrying about completely depleting that jar. Okay, another question. After 5 months of baking sourdough, I now use my KitchenAid bowl for the starter. Yes, I love doing that. If I'm gonna use my KitchenAid mixer to make my dough, that is exactly where I feed my starter. So I'm so glad that you do that, Mary. That is so smart. Hi, Suzanne from Colorado. Oh, this is another great question. How often should you feed your starter? I don't ever feed my starter that's in the fridge unless I'm baking. When you feed this starter to bake something and part of that goes back into your main mother starter jar, you just fed your starter. So I would say we are feeding our starter by giving it discard 3-4 times a month. That's great. That gets it to the point, and I should say, you don't have to feed it that much. I just look at it like it's getting fed every week that we bake, but I know next week I'm not going to make any dough because we have other stuff going on. And probably the following week, I don't know if I will. So it will sit with nothing happening for a couple weeks. But guess what? Your starter can actually sit in your fridge. So there's like a difference here. If it's in your fridge, it could go a year plus. You don't do anything to it, and it will get more and more dormant. If your starter is on your counter, you have to feed it every day. If you don't feed it every day, what can happen is that it can start to grow bad bacteria. So that's why I firmly suggest put your starter in your fridge. If you have it on your counter, then you need to be doing something with it every single day. When it lives in your fridge, the only thing you need to do is give it a little bit of discard, even just like 5 grams. And that will help revive it and keep it going. Now, the more dormant that your starter is, so I'm going to show you this one because this is my dormant starter, so we have it on hand. This is a very dormant one. Look at all of that hooch. It's starting to turn black. This is telling you that your starter is getting more and more hungry. The more hooch that's on the top and the darker that it gets, the more hungry that your starter is. It's not dead though. It's still alive. This is actually proof that it's alive. If it was dead, if it had completely gone kaput, this would start to turn more like a green pinkish color and it would smell like a baby diaper. That's when you know your starter's dead. Give it to the chickens. Okay, maybe put it in the compost or your trash. But if it's just like turning gray like this, then there's two things that you can do. I just mix this right back in because guess what? It came from the starter, so I'm just going to give it back to the starter. Some people don't like to do that. It's up to you. This is a preference thing. However much hooch you pour off the top though, put that much water back into your starter, stir it up really good, and then just know the more hooch and liquid that's on the top and the darker that it is, the more feedings that you're going to need to do for your starter to get it to wake back up. Because think it's basically been in hibernation. So this has been in there, I think, for close to a year. I'm gonna just see how long it can sit before it dies. And I like pulling it out and showing you because guess what? This is crazy. It's like the sourdough experiment in a jar. When your starter's really, really dormant, what you're gonna do is essentially treat it like a baby starter. And you're gonna do a 1-to-1 feeding on it every single day. But here's the thing to remember. The first day, you're going to take 25 grams out of here, and you're going to feed it 25 grams of water, 25 grams of flour. It's going to rise and it's going to fall. Well, it probably won't rise very much the first day because it's real quiet and it needs more food. But it's going to maybe get a little bubbles. The second day, you need to take 50 grams out of whatever container you're feeding it in. If it's a jar or a bowl or whatever it is, take 50 grams out and repeat. So then you would only have 25 grams in your bowl. That 50 grams that you take out is discard. Put that in a clean jar, keep it. And then what's in your bowl is this 25 grams of the fed starter from the day before. You're going to feed that 25 grams, another 1-1-1 feeding. 25 grams of water, 25 grams of flour. You're going to repeat that process over and over again until you see that it is fully bubbling and rising and doubling in size. Then you know your starter is ready to bake with. Because what you're doing is when you're doing those multiple feedings, is essentially it's like you're helping your sourdough yeast do some workouts. And think like, okay, you sat on your couch for a whole year and then you go to the gym. Are you going to be able to lift the same thing that you lifted a year ago? No, it's going to take some time to build up that strength again. That's what you're doing with your sourdough starter is you're helping it work out, you're giving it food, you're helping it get stronger because if it's not strong, your bread is going to be flat and dense and gummy and sad. So the longer that your starter has been left alone in the fridge and not used, just know that you're going to need to do a couple more feedings in order to get it to the point that it's actively rising and turning into like this big, fluffy, fed. Like, look at this starter. We want your starter to be like this, that it has air pockets and it's big and fluffy and happy. If your starter's not doing that, don't waste the flour on making dough because then you're just going to be so bummed because your bread is going to be really flat. So let me see what another question. I'm going to do one more question before we hop off of here because guess what? I am in the middle, I'll show you here in a minute, I'm in the middle of frosting all of the sourdough discard sugar cookies that we're giving to our guests that are coming this weekend. And if it works out, we might pop on and do a little live on Friday morning when our workshop is getting underway so that you can kind of get a taste. Even though I know it's not possible for everybody to travel to be with us, we want to give you a taste of what it's like to be here at our table with us. We love hosting in-person things whenever it works out. If you are in the area, come join us for a freedom dinner Oh my word, they're the most beautiful community-led dinners, and all of the proceeds from those dinners go to Atlas Free to fight human trafficking. We donate 10% of all of our proceeds from YouTube, from all of our business stuff goes to Atlas Free, so that all of this beautiful gathering, all of this baking with sourdough, all of the gardening, all of the hosting gets to give freedom to those that are caught in really just horrific life. We won't go into all of that. Let's talk about the sourdough, but I just want you to know that you're doing good work. When you watch our videos, when you join us here live, we get to do good work together using our everyday lives to make a difference and give freedom. And I'll share more stories in another live, but I have some really fun stories to share with you about some of the women that we've gotten to meet through the work. But okay, let's do another question here. Mary's saying, my baguettes are turning out a little flat, not as round as I thought they would be. I'm doing the towel and the parchment paper. Okay, Mary, make sure that you're proofing them in the fridge. When I proof mine in the fridge, they stay in more of like a rounder shape. Also, if they're still not staying in that round shape, baking them cold from the fridge, try to work just a little bit, maybe 25 grams more flour into your batch of dough. It might just be that they need a little bit more flour in order to keep that shape. But keep playing with it because they're fun to make, and our family loves them for sandwiches. Okay, let's see. Sue is saying my starter is about a month old. Should I be feeding it once or twice a day? If your starter is a month old, give it a good feeding and put it in the fridge and give yourself a little break, because once it hits that point, if it's actively rising and doubling in size each day, you don't need to be feeding it every day. Feeding it every day does make for a very strong starter, but it can also be really fatiguing for you as the caretaker of the starter. And so give yourself a break if you need it. But if you're fine doing a feeding every day, one feeding is just fine. Okay, another question. Okay, this is a great one. What is so special about sourdough? Why is everybody going crazy? Was it ever complicated when you first started making dough? I feel like sourdough has so many steps. So, okay, number one, why is sourdough the big thing right now? Let's see. Well, I think it really went nuts over COVID because people were home more. And then I feel like it has kind of this resurgence in the winter time because people are home and wanting to bake and have it with soup and all of that stuff. Also, sourdough, when you make your own sourdough bread at home, it is way, way healthier for you than even if you made your own yeasted dough at home. And the reason why, to make it really, really simple, is because that live sourdough yeast is working its magic on all of the gluten, all of the flour that's in your dough, and it's fermenting it. Anything that is fermented is so good for your gut. So if you're going to eat bread, the best bread you could ever eat is homemade sourdough bread. When you buy sourdough bread from the store, if you got it from just like a regular grocery store, look at the label, because most of the time that sourdough bread that's made at a grocery store in their bakery is not actual sourdough. They are using like a vinegar base to give it that like tangy flavor. It's also why lots of people say, I don't like sourdough, because that's what they had. When you have real, true homemade sourdough, it has a very mild flavor. It won't be crazy sour unless you used all really old fermented sourdough starter to make your dough, and then you let your dough ferment for a long time. So that's to answer those few questions. Okay, is sourdough complicated? I think that there are lots of ways to do sourdough well. And the best thing that you can do is to find one person that you really enjoy their teaching. It like makes sense what they're saying and how they explain it, and follow their methods. If you are trying to take what I say and marry it with like five other bakers on YouTube and what they all say, it is going to be so confusing. And it's not because what I'm saying is right and what they're saying is wrong, or vice versa. It's that everybody finds their own rhythm and method that works for their life and what they do. And once you find that rhythm, sourdough baking is actually really, really simple, but there are, I wouldn't say there's more steps than making yeasted bread, but the steps are farther apart because sourdough yeast is not instant. And I think it's honestly the best antidote for our culture because it slows you down. It helps you to enjoy the process, but you can't be in a rush. You can't rush sourdough. The yeast, that live yeast that's in there, it takes time. It needs time to work on that flour to get stronger. And if you try to rush it, you're going to be really frustrated with the end product because it's going to be flat, dense, gummy, not delicious. So if you're feeling in a rush, I want you to take a deep breath and say, what's the one step that I can do today? And just do that one step. And so that's why I break everything up into different days. It isn't because it's not possible to do it all on one day. It's because that isn't realistic for my everyday life. And I want you to find the rhythm that's realistic for your everyday life because you'll enjoy it better. It will make it more fun for you to invite people to your table. It'll make it more fun to share bread with people. If you're trying to use a rhythm and a sourdough like schedule that does not work for your work schedule or your life schedule, you will never enjoy it. You'll never really find like the joy in baking because it's gonna feel disjointed and frustrating and stressful. So I like to break up all of those steps. So the first step is feeding your starter. Do that big feeding so that it can rest all night or it can rest all day. And then 12 hours later, you're gonna mix up your dough. Then once you mix up your dough, cover it well. That's the one time. Once you have mixed up your dough, cover that container well. You don't want air getting in there, and put it in your fridge. Whatever amount of dough you've made, if it's a small bowl for one loaf, if it's a big thing because you're feeding a bunch of people, whatever amount that you have made, cover it well and put it in your fridge. Let your dough proof then in there until the next day. And then the next day, shape your loaf, put it into your Banneton basket, cover it well, put it back in the fridge if you don't have time to bake. And then the fourth day, if you're like, I have time to bake today, then all you have to do is take that Banneton basket out of the fridge, score it, and bake it. Now, can you put those things together into one day? Yes, you can. You need your whole day then. And that's where I think sourdough isn't realistic for most people because most people are like, I can't baby it all day long. And so you are allowed to split it up. Okay, I'm going to look for one more question. Okay, this is a great one. This is going to be our last question for today. We'll hop back on Friday if it works. And we will have a live next week, Tuesday at 10 a.m. And I look forward to seeing you then. I haven't decided yet what we're going to chat about. So you give me your questions and maybe we'll talk about why the dough is dense because that's the last question for today. My dough seems so dense. It tears apart when I'm doing my stretch and folds. Do I need more water? It does pass the float test before I start. Okay, so that's a great question, Morgan. Okay, if when you're doing your stretch and folds, if your dough, here, let me show you this dough. So the very first stretch and fold, my dough is typically a little bit shaggy and not well incorporated. It's like the water is still hydrating that flour. And the sourdough starter is just beginning to work on all of it. By the time you get to the second and third stretch and folds, you want your dough to be like this, where you can pull it up, you can wiggle it, and you can go down. Now, I like to dip my fingers in water so that the dough doesn't stick to my hands because we're not trying to incorporate more flour in. But if you can't do this with your dough, if it is like breaking apart, Morgan, yes, you need more water. Every different kind of flour reacts different in the sense that it needs a different ratio of water. So if you're trying to do like whole wheat or spelt or rye or any of those heartier grains, those, you either need to use less of that flour or you need to use more water. So what I suggest doing is actually starting with like 150 grams less of the flour. If it's too sticky, you can always add a little more flour in as you're doing those stretch and folds. But this is your goal. You want it that you can, by the third stretch and fold, you should be able to do this with your dough. Pull up this big chunk, tip it over onto itself. And of course, this is different because this is a huge batch. This is enough dough for 10 loaves. So this is a lot of dough. But it shows you, okay, my dough should be doing this. As you're going through those stretch and folds, it's getting more and more elastic. And that's good because it's all that elasticity in it that is helping the dough to essentially, like, all of the gluten is starting to break down in a good way so that you'll have really light, fluffy bread. So, okay, I'm gonna sign off for today. We'll make sure, if you're watching this after the live, we're gonna make sure that all of the links are down in the description below so that you can find anything that I mentioned, all of the tools that I use. There's a link down below to our Amazon shop. I love the Amazon shop because those are the actual tools that I'm using. I don't put anything in that shop unless it's something that I love. And so you can just know that those are the things that I use every week as we're baking. And then we'll also put the links down there to any of the videos that we mentioned. And we'll see. If it works out on Friday, we're going to pop back on and be live and we'll show you the whole setup of what we're doing, because this dough I made it for the Friday and Saturday workshops so that everybody can have fresh bread when they're here, because we're going to talk about all of those steps and make sure that everybody that's coming has what they need so that they can get baking. So happy sourdough baking.